Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to RaC Guild Townhall number 17, 5th of November 2025. This is the last town hall for 2025. Things get a bit crazy from this point. We're almost at Christmas and then it's January, which for the Australians and the Kiwis in the room, it's our summer holiday. So we're not around December, January. So yeah, this is the end of the year and we're stoked this evening. Very happy to have a presentation from Ngaire and Jayden on the RaC Sandpit program that's been going on at the Australian government. This is a program that started after we did a whole load of work on designing a rules code process, and the Australian government picked it up. So it's been really exciting to hear where you've got to. I won't go any further. We will have time for Q&A after the presentation, but I'll hand it over to you. Jayden and Ngaire, thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you, Jo. Let me just present my screen. Let's have a look. Can you guys see that?
We can indeed.
Lovely. All right. So, Ngaire, I'll start with you if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So, Ngaire, I've also had Ngaire and Jayden, but many pronunciations. I'm the engagement officer for the GovCMS DXP Digital Experience Platform project. So we've just wrapped up the Rules Code Sandpit project. I'll get a little bit more into that later. And we'll also have my colleague Jayden here.
And I'm Jayden, Program Support Officer on the Digital Experience Platform. And of that, we have the Rules Code program of work, which is one of our major projects. So my journey with Rules Code began at university, where I first explored how AI could assist with fast-tracking the Rules Code process. And since then, I've continued with Rules Code in GovCMS, bringing those ideas into real-world government projects. So GovCMS, we're a whole of government website product and service. We provide a website platform for federal, state and local governments. We currently have around 370 sites and 120 customer entities. So I think we're a unique government product in the way that we've cultivated a community, and that model is strengthened by our open source foundation. So it allows agencies to share solutions, innovate together. And the benefit from a community-driven approach is that it keeps GovCMS adaptable and cost-effective. So I think most of us are pretty familiar with Rules Code, so we'll dive into our Sandpit program objectives. So validability. There's very few examples of Rules Code being used at an enterprise scale across the world. Many countries have trialed proof of concepts, but we wanted to implement a whole of government platform which enabled agencies to use Rules Code with ease. So by trialing Rules Code through a Sandpit program like this, it enabled us to identify the best use cases for Rules Code and help understand how agencies might want to interact with it. Experiment and prototype. So we wanted to enable agencies to experiment, but this is quite hard in government sometimes. So there'll be a time and cost for each agency to spin up their own experiments, and they'd be starting from scratch. So we funded a program where each agency could come to us with their proposed use case for Rules Code. They could explore it in a safe off-network environment, which wouldn't be affecting anything in their production systems. And they were able to test that and really validate any of their initial ideas, because up until the Sandpit program, people only had concepts of Rules Code and they didn't really know how it could work in practice. And we wanted to promote and build capability. So as we know, Rules Code involves many disciplines, from programmers to policy experts. So we wanted to raise awareness for the process and promote its benefits. We also set out to give people hands-on experience with Rules Code and support upskilling and knowledge sharing throughout the Australian Public Service. Now, I'm just going to quickly touch on what is a Sandpit. This is the basic structure of our Sandpits, where we worked with agency participants and our vendor Salsa to bring each Rules Code use case to life. So the government rules are stored in the rules engine, which we're using OpenFisca. And the rules engine connects to our downstream interfaces. So most of our sandpits connected to a web form on a Drupal-based GovCMS site, but we did have one third-party company, I guess Sandpit use case, where they were able to ingest the government rules into their own software. So that demonstrated the flexibility of the rules as code approach, I guess, and that you can use any user interface you want. I'll also call out that every component in this diagram and in our sandpits is open source from our front end to our rules engine. So this enables a high degree of customization. It keeps costs low for customers, and it means that we don't get locked into these big enterprise platforms that make it hard to get out of for government sometimes. So I'll hand over to Ngaire, who'll go over what we did in our Sandpit program and some lessons learned.
Great, thank you, Jayden. So we ran for 18 months. So we started the project, well, technically we ran for almost 2 years, but we started our first non-GovCMS Sandpit in March 2024, and we wrapped up the project in September 2025. So we were essentially running for 18 months. We had done some work before that to test the concept internally on our own GovCMS use case to see about eligibility. But over 18 months, we have completed 16 Sandpit projects with 13 participating agencies. And that covered a very wide range of agencies. We had some policy-based, and we also had some which were very frontline service-based. So out of the 16 sandpits, we had 5 which were government-facing. So this was government to government. Internal types of sandpits, internal use cases to improve functionality and efficiency. So, for example, we did one with the DTA, which is the Digital Transformation Agency, looking at whether particular new investments required going through a particular approval or oversight process. We did another one which was a calculations-based well, we did 2 actually, which were calculations based for employees to allow them to do some financial planning, and a few others as well. We did 5 citizen facing or public facing, so things like eligibility checkers, and we did 4 business facing, which were based in compliance, such as in the WHS space, work health and safety space, and also in the agriculture space as well, and then 2 special use cases. So one of them was, as Jayden mentioned, the third-party software, where the third party was able to use an API to draw rules held by one of our agencies and to draw it into their completely independent software package and use that. So in that instance, the agency in question, being the rules owner, would be able to update the rules as required, and that would flow through to the third-party software without the third-party software company having to update them themselves, and so the control remained with the primary agency. Okay, so what did an average sandpit look like? So we worked very closely with Salsa Digital doing these sandpits, and we were very lucky that we came into it with an incredibly strong structure. So Alfred and the team over at Salsa put together an incredible structure that we were able to work with. One of the things that we did introduce quite early on in the piece was to do some pre-project scoping with potential agencies, because we had a lot of interest, but not everyone decided to move forward with a Sandpit project. So one of the things that we did as the pre-project was to look at feasibility of projects, to talk to them about what was involved, how many questions could be included in the final product, and also to give them some demonstrations to show them how it worked. And that way we could do those discussions before we engaged formally with Salsa, so we could maximize the time that we had there. Once we did get into the project, there were a number of stages, starting with refinement. So we spent a couple of workshops refining exactly what the project would be, where the information was going to be coming from, and what the desired outcome would be. where the information was. So if there was going to be materials drawn from legislation, from policy documents, from business flow type of documentation as well, it came from quite a variety of sources. Then we did rule statements, where those rules were taken and turned into plain English statements, and then those were mapped into user journeys, which could be followed through a particular process. So that usually occurred within 4 or 5 workshops over that entire process, from kickoff through to rules mapping. And once that was done, it moved on to build, where we had Mark Calvert and Suchi from Salsa was able to pick that material up and build it out. So the first thing that happened there was what we call pseudocode, where the questions were mapped out, decided what they would be. So were they free text fields? Were they numerical fields, drop downs, radio buttons, etc.? That then was coded into OpenFisca, and for all but one of them was then built as a Drupal front end in a sandboxed environment, which was completely independent from websites behind a shield. And once that was built out, the last step was showcases. We often ended up doing 2 showcases, one for the project team to go over what had been built. That then gave them time to say, okay, this needs to be changed, that needs to be tweaked. And once that was done, we would do an executive showcase to the management to show that, yeah, this is what can be done with rules as code. So it was very well structured, very intensive kind of process, and it had some fantastic results. So some of the lessons learned, we had a lot of lessons learned through the whole process. I've got a great heap of notes here. I won't go into all of them. I'll just pick out a couple. So in the first instance with scope, we started out very loose with what our scope would be or could be for these projects, and we found that that was too loose. So we had to tighten that up quite early. So provide some very strong guidance to agencies. What is it exactly that you're looking to do? Give them some examples on how to build out the scope of a potential project. So we didn't come into the project going, well, we're not quite sure how we're going to do it, but we want to do something sort of like this. We tried to make sure that a much firmer scope was designed first. When it came to staff expectations or expectations for the project, staff commitment was a big one. So understanding who needed to be in the room at what stage. We always started out with sort of project people, business analysts, the people with the idea about, okay, this is what we want to achieve. But as we went through the project, we would also have to bring in subject matter experts in particular, and they would need to be worked with because they had that time commitment there as well. Sometimes we needed to get in a whole range of people. I remember, I think in one we would have upwards of 8 or 10 subject matter experts in the room with us at any one time, and it could get a bit intense as we worked through the rules statements and the rules maps about sometimes quite minor details. Then when it came to engagement, one of the really big things we learned was education. Often we found when we did have the new people come into the room, they might not actually know what was going on. They would be told, hey, you need to come in and help us with this project. And they would go, well, what the heck is this rules as code thing, and how is it supposed to work, and how are we supposed to be doing that? So we would need to spend some time at the start of each workshop just explaining exactly what it is and what we were doing. Also, when it came to education and communication, we really had to concentrate on who the audience was. So, for instance, if we were talking to a policy person, they would appreciate the benefits of plain English policy, where citizens would be able to find accurate entitlements information as an example, and then link them to the source of truth for that legislation. Because let's face it, the vast majority of people wouldn't have any idea how to find out find information through legislation. So it had to be able to make sure that was accurately interpreted. And that's in contrast to, say, technical stakeholders, where we would have to concentrate a lot more on the benefits to reduce duplication and to manage the rules in one central place that could then be used in multiple front ends. So tailoring our communication and our education was a very important part. Also, I'll just highlight communication channels on this one. This was one of the lessons that we learned from one of our projects, which did became interesting, let's put it that way. We had to be quite firm about what channels we were going to use, and that just those channels were used, because if people started doing phone calls or emails where everyone wasn't included, it was very easy to lose track of what was going on. So communication was vital, and making sure that was well known. And my last point there about support, I did mention scoping. We did create some templates early on in the piece to help guide people through creating a scope. And then the next thing that we definitely had to do was to create some guides. And those guides were quite detailed as to what rules as code was, how a project worked, who would have to be involved, the hours that could be expected, and what the outcomes were going to be. And as part of the early engagement, those materials were provided to our participants. And that really helped to keep things efficient. It also helped people who were interested in projects, they could go to their executive and say, this is what it's about, this is the information, this is what can be expected, and it helped them to make their case as well. Okay, I'll hand back over to Jayden to keep going.
Thanks, Ngaire. So while we had many participants in our sandpits, we also engaged with government at a broader level. So we talked to many regulatory and compliance bodies. So we had ongoing discussions with our regulatory reform group, who are responsible for better regulation in Australia. We discussed rules as code with our Federal Office of Parliamentary Counsel and with the team who run the legislation.gov API. And we learned about the complexities in the Commonwealth and the states, and our distributed nature of drafting, and how we might look at implementing rules as code throughout government. We've also been looking into the productivity potential in government. There's been some interesting work done in New South Wales on potential efficiency gains if a rules as code approach is implemented. And there was also a recent economic reform roundtable which highlighted the need to reduce the regulatory burden on entities, which RaC will directly assist with. And so each sandpit united experts across disciplines to co-design better rules. So policy people, lawyers, programmers, web managers, and service designers. This created a collaboration space for teams to work together and process complex rules. This was great for starting conversations around how services were delivered, and it enabled different teams to understand the work of their colleagues. In some instances, we even found some inconsistencies in legislation that wouldn't have been spotted if we didn't go through the rules as code approach. And we also spread the word. We talked about rules as code to Australian Public Service staff across government forums and committees. We presented our projects to internal executives like our CIO and others within our department. And we've also previously briefed our minister on the project and its progress. We presented to a number of whole of government forums, and these engagements, throughout them, we reached, I think, at least 1,000 people. With one event, we had 700 staff across Australia attending in a single session. And so some feedback from that event we've showed here. So all the feedback was very enthusiastic, and it showed that the public service is very interested in rules as code and they can see the potential for it. And we've also had some media interest. So there's been a lot of articles around rules as code coming out, but some of these articles specifically mention GovCMS or the sandpits and some of the work that we've been doing in the Australian government. So onto some outcomes where we'll expand some sandpit players did. So we had some agencies take their base sandpit and add some additional features on top. Home Affairs, who chose to do a rules as code use case on student visa eligibility, were interested in simulating the impact of a changed policy. So this tool was an application tool where someone could enter all their information and then they would be able to see if they could potentially be eligible for a student visa. But Home Affairs as an organisation wanted to understand what would that look like if they changed certain things. So they did this by using the open fiscal rules which were created in the Sandpit, and they added custom scripting to create some synthetic data and do some modelling. Home Affairs modelled the potential changes to both the English language requirements and cost of living measured in CPI. And so to compute the impact of the change in policy, in this case, say if they increased or decreased the English language requirements or the CPI for a visa, what effect would this have on the number of applicants that were eligible? So as you can see in the graph, they found the English language requirement had the largest impact. And this was pretty exciting because this modelling could be used to inform future government policy, as well as assist with policy and impact analysis, and just enable government to respond more quickly to change. Now, linking back to our original objectives, I think we achieved what we set out to deliver and more. So we validated the feasibility of rules as code in the Australian government, and we're currently moving into production with an enterprise-grade rules engine. We even had one agency participant so interested to move to production that they didn't want to wait until their Sandpit was over. Rules as code is now in our department's ICT and digital strategy, and we continue to engage with our regulatory bodies to promote rules as code further. And we gave agencies a chance to test the tools out. Many are going further with this. We had one agency explore the potential of personalised rules as code enabled user journeys, and another major department has initiated an internal rules as code working group where they continue to run experiments. So thank you for listening. We'd love to hear any questions and thoughts. I'll hand over to Jo or Julie for sharing.
Thank you, Jayden. That was awesome. Really awesome, and great work. Well done, and thank you. We need more of this, lots more of this. I've got 4 or 5 questions that I've noted down, but I don't want to take up space. So yeah, who would like to kick off with questions? Or I can jump in.
Go for it, Jo.
I can jump in. Okay, so you mentioned fantastic results, Ngaire. Was that referring to essentially the last slide and the last piece that Jayden talked to us about? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As Jayden mentioned, we have had a lot of agencies who would not have even known what rules as code was prior to launching this particular Sandpit. So we were really able to spread the word throughout the APS and around the GovCMS community, because we do regular communications out to our wider community of over 100 different entities at the state, federal and local level governments within Australia. And as Jayden also said, we do have some who are really eager. There was one who wanted to do a lift and shift straight away, and we weren't able to do that straight off the bat, but they are chomping at the bit to be able to get their system up and running within their own Sandpit, within their own website once we're ready to go.
Awesome. I'm interested to know the convincing pattern. Like, did you have to provide a business case, here are the potential benefits to your workflow, here is some cost, like if it was a commercial project, it would be literally a cost benefit analysis?
Yeah, so I think Jayden would be able to probably talk a little bit more about, he's done some work in that cost benefit analysis space there, and it is definitely something we have to think about quite carefully when we move forward. One of the benefits, of course, of rules as code is that it is scalable. You can start small and work up. You're not having to do a massive commitment right at the start. You can start with one tool and then develop it from there. But Jayden, did you want to comment on cost benefit analysis work that's been done on rules as code?
Well, I think there's a little bit been done, but we haven't done so much as that in the Sandpit projects, because this was a funded program where it was quite easy for agencies to get involved, because all they had to do was get a
Contact
bunch of
us.
people in the room, contact us and let us know if they wanted to be involved. And we kind of went through the initial scoping and what would be best for rules as code. And so they were really excited, because it meant they got to try something for free. And what we're doing now is we're working on some materials to support agencies to understand the resources, the workload, and the maintenance for rules as code. Like, what does it look like for a team in government to support a rules as code solution on a day-to-day basis?
Thank you. I can continue asking questions.
I've got two I might throw in
Go
two
for
there
it,
that I had, Jo. Yeah, and you shared a bunch of lessons learned. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm getting this
Yes.
weird. Yeah, okay. Not sure what's going on. There's some weirdness anyway, but I'll continue. Sorry. So you talked about a bunch of lessons learned, and so indirectly you might have answered this question, the first one. But like, what would you guys consider as being the biggest barrier to greater adoption? And the second question, you can choose to answer it in whichever order, but they're very different, is you mentioned that one of them didn't have a UI. And could you just elaborate a little more on that particular one, and why not, and what was their experience? And
Sure.
yeah, so yeah.
So we'll take the first half first. I think one of the biggest barriers to adoption is just understanding and awareness of rules as code as a tool. It's not well known amongst the wider APS, and it's the various methods or the various use cases for it aren't necessarily well known. So a big part of this project was actually that education component, being able to get the message out there. This is what it is. This is what we do. As Jayden mentioned, one of the groups we spoke to was the APSC Digital and Data Professions, which has thousands of people across the APS, and we had a lot of people attend that, many of whom just didn't know what rules as code was prior to that particular session. The second half of your question around the sandpit that didn't have a UI. So the vast majority of the sandpits did have a UI that was built in Drupal, but the last one that we did, it got in right at the end of the whole project, was involving third-party software. So it was involving private software. I will say it was financial software. So a UI wasn't built at our end. It had to, the API had to be integrated at their end. So the agency and their, just to confuse things, they call them DSPs as well, their digital service provider had to do that work in the background to get the API to talk to their software. And that was a bit of an interesting struggle. We weren't involved with that because that was very much agency based, but it did work, and they were able to show that it worked. So fingers crossed they will adopt that more widely within their particular agency and portfolio.
I'll just jump in with one of the barriers. I think that rules as code sits at that really hard spot between policy, law, and IT. And because you need people that understand all these different areas, it's so hard to get that, to promote the benefits in a way that people understand. And the fact that to do rules as code projects, you need all these different people in the room. And a lot of the times it's very hard to get to these people. Like in some agencies, they wanted their lawyers involved, but it took them a while for the lawyers to actually come to the meeting and then also get an understanding of what we were trying to do here and what we were trying to achieve. That's a bit of a barrier with how, just how many people you need involved really to do it well.
Yeah, but once you did get them all together, I'm sure all them aligning was super easy and simple, right?
Not so much.
That's a very optimistic way of looking at it, Alfred.
Cup half full, cup half full.
And just on that sandpit that didn't have a user interface, it was really good because we were experimenting with an organization that was outside of government. Yeah. And so by them connecting in with government rules, it meant that
exactly.
it showed the scalability of the system, and that the government could have rules that were serving their internal systems, and at the same time you can have an external provider that's drawing down out of those rules, and government can change the rules and it'll be propagated everywhere at the same time.
Absolutely. It was why I asked the question, because I was like particularly keen to hear that it wasn't, because it's channel agnostic, right? That's the whole idea about centralized utility, channel agnostic. Drupal web is just one consumer of the utility. So that's, cool.
I'll just also add to that one. One of the things that particular project did show was that rules base could be drawn upon by multiple different pieces of software.
Exactly.
So it wasn't just a case, this is specific to this piece of software with this company. No, it could go out to every single piece of every single company and every single piece of software that particular agency worked with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Cool.
So it can be used by the recognition was that it could be used by any piece of software. Was the recognition, like you mentioned one modeling project that kind of came out of it? So with the lawyers and the policy makers that did get involved in this project, was there kind of wide acceptance or understanding that, you know, how useful this could be earlier in the process? You know, like one example is great, but, you know, did that message get around? You know, this can be used in your drafting.
That is definitely one of the things that we would like to explore more. We weren't able to really explore that so much in this in the Sandpit projects, because we were mostly working with legislation that had already been drafted. But throughout the process, we did actually have some instances where inconsistencies were located in legislation. So working through what are the rules associated with this particular use case, it's like, oh, okay, so definition of a spouse, that's different in this piece of legislation to this piece of legislation, and likewise definition of a work week could be different across multiple different pieces of legislation as well. So not so much the early drafting, although I do know that there are some organisations out there in the world that are working on that right now. But it was certainly very useful for doing that comparison of policy and the comparison of legislation to see where the gaps were. Sorry, cat.
Very, very happy cat being part of the webinar. I can see.
Jo, we got a question in the comments section from Danny Marlowe. Sure, if you want to. Do
you want me to read it out, Danny, or do you want to say yourself? Are you there, Danny? I'll read it out. Given that the majority of implementations were website-based, how might we engage other potential implementers, particularly in the policy development space? So similar thread.
Yeah.
I think, Ngaire.
No, go on.
Okay. I was just going to say that our regulatory bodies within the Department of Finance have been really interesting with engaging, because there's a couple of places that are connectors to the policy people in government. And so by engaging these people who have regulators, or they have kind of a oversight over the regulated entities in government, and if they can see the benefits and they can kind of champion rules as code, it means that we get to spread that to the policy people in government, because being in GovCMS, we're a website technology platform, so it's hard for us to engage those policy people in government. So I think that those communities of practice, the formal and informal channels, both within and outside of our departments, have been quite useful. But we will be doing more to engage further and looking at the potential of expanding this.
Has it got up to the political layer? You know, like we have a government at the moment that is, you know, looking for you know, savings on regulatory you know, processes across government, right? And it's funny, you know, this Rules as Code project started in New Zealand, but we're now behind you in Australia, right? So yeah, I'm wondering whether the next layer, not the public service, has actually you know, clocked this and is aware of the benefits.
I think that there is an indication that there is like knowledge of this. Through the regulatory reform agenda that this government has, they've mentioned regulatory technologies and the need to reduce regulation, the need to support businesses and entities that don't understand their regulation requirements. They might not understand what they have to comply to. And so there's a real push to help the, what was it? There was a word that I used. It was the reducing the regulatory burden. So that's been a big focus. That we had a regulatory roundtable, the economic reform roundtable earlier this year, where they talked a lot about how we need to reduce the burden of this on government entities and on businesses. And though they don't go into the specifics of rules as code, I think that if you read between the lines that this is a technology that can directly support this agenda, and it's been kind of hard because rules as code is quite technical when you get down to it. So you have to kind of be able to sell the benefits at that higher level to get support. But we did have there's an ex-prime minister on record that that has been quoted that he said that we should be digitizing our legislation, and that we should be making legislation machine readable. So I think it's definitely an awareness, but it's good to get that at the forefront, especially with the regulatory talk that's happening these days.
That's really good to hear. That's awesome. I'm always an advocate, as you know, for the citizen engagement in government, right? And things like your example you gave for the student benefit, you know, wouldn't it be interesting to bring those kinds of tools into a citizens' assembly and actually have a frank and fair conversation about the benefits that are offered and what it does to the curve, so everybody can see it? It's a level of transparency that, you know, we know is possible. We know it's possible. We just have to bring it into being. Any other questions? Anybody? Oh, Danny, another one. Sorry, I missed you. With AI receiving record funding and attention, can rules as code be marketed as a desirable alternative to agentic AI despite guardrails?
That's a very, very interesting question. I think rules as code is can actually it can help with AI because it can act as a guardrail. So you can have an AI agent that would comply with everything that is said in the rules as code, in the coded rules, and it wouldn't be able to go outside of those boundaries, because the benefit of code is that a machine can understand it and AI can understand it much better than it can human readable legislation. So in terms of rules as code, there's that piece with AI where you can use it at the kind of citizen-centric level, but rules as code can also be used to, I guess, streamline the process of converting both human readable legislation into code, but it's also been used to convert code into human readable legislation for drafters. So there's a two-way process that can happen here. And one of the interesting things is that AI is actually pretty good at doing a first cut of things. So it can do a first cut of your eligibility criteria. It can spit that out, and then you can have a human review that. But there's a lot to be discussed around if you want to put that into an automated system, because at the moment, the very early experiments indicate that the checking required of these AI-enabled rules as code solutions is just too much. But I think it could help as a first draft where you can dissect that legislation and say, you know, here's what the AI's given me, here's what the actual legislation is, and you could compare it. And then that could help that business analyst or policy person start the initial steps of that rules as code process.
Very well articulated, Jayden. Amen.
As I say,
it's a tough question, Danny.
Yeah, technology circles. We're early to this, right? Like, yeah. Thank you. Good questions. Any others?
Sorry, Jo, I saw that you had one earlier in the chat about was that an enterprise or an external tool used by another government agency? Was that referring to a use case that we had?
the use case that was ingested by a financial software, was that another part of government, or was that like a business unit that's sitting outside of government?
Yes. So Ngaire, did you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So in that case, it was a completely private business. So
Awesome.
so not connected with government, doing work in that space. But one of the key issues around that particular use case was that it's actually illegal for those private businesses to hold the rules. They're just not allowed to, and they're not allowed to provide that advice. So if they want to do this, they have to go to the single source of truth, which in this case was the government agency. So yes, in this case, the people absorbing the API, completely outside of government, completely private business. Yeah.
No,
Jayden,
sorry, Jayden, I know you had your hand up, but just with what you've just said, is that a law, or that was that a guideline? Like, what? I'm curious, like, who made that rule, or
so
that can or can't?
I won't go into the details of that one, because that was that's based in the agency. But in this particular instance, it is actually a law that they're not allowed to provide that advice independently. They have to link that back to the parent, for want of a better word, agency.
Sure. Okay.
Jayden.
Just expanding it with that use case, I think that there's an efficiency gain for government here, because these were private companies that are providing information for citizens. And so it means that a citizen doesn't always have to go to government for information, but they could go, if you search up on Google, government isn't always the first place that comes up. It's NGOs and third parties and all these other people that are taking government information and then representing that for citizens. And so this is a good use case for that, where you have a citizen that wants to access some information that they know that a government has, and they can go to a third-party entity, and that third party will have the government rules in their eligibility checker, and you don't have to go to government for it, because the government is the one administering those rules. So I think that was quite a powerful use case, where it shows that you don't always have to go to government to get the government rules.
Thank you. I just want to drill just another step on from Alfred's question, because it's like, you're always looking for a carrot and a stick, right? And if there is a law, a rule, which means that a commercial entity of any kind can't hold the rules, right? So that is was that in a slice, or is that broad?
So they can hold the rules. It's more just complexities around giving advice.
Right.
So by drawing down the rules with the direct source from government, it meant that they're not trying to, they're not manipulating that in any way. It's the direct connection. So it's the rules that are coming from that government agency, and it's
kind of hard to get into it without seeing
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
agency specifically.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe Alfred could drill into that offline with you. We're at 1:45, so we've done our 45 minutes. We often go over, so if there are any other questions, now would be the time. Yes, go for it, Julie.
Yeah, just like sort of, I guess, almost like closing off, like out of the 16 agencies, how many did indicate that they wanted to go to production, versus some that like have any kind of gone to the end of this and said, yeah, this was fun, but not for us, like just curious, like where did it sort of end up in terms of the overall feedback out of the 16 sandpits?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the 16 sandpits, 13 agencies, we did have definitely 2 which were in that, hey, when can we do the lift and shift? We want to do it, and we want to do it now. And we did have one where it was, okay, we're not going to have this in time, we're going to try something else, and that's fine. Mostly we had a lot of interest in taking it further once it's production ready. Usually when it was, this is interesting, but it's not for us right now, we sort of pruned them out at the pre-project stage. So we had very few who got to the end and went, yeah, nah. So there was still a lot of interest in taking the technology further. Whether they would take it further on their own or whether they would wait for us to get into production, of course, is an internal decision. And we shall see how many put their hands up and say, okay, yes, we're ready to go.
We're going to be restarting our communications next year because we're going to be closer to production. So then we're going to be getting our agencies interested, and they'll be able to see, we'll get a more accurate time on what it looks like to actually use rules code. Because at the moment they can't use this in like a real life environment, and so that because we couldn't give them an accurate timeline, they were like, well, you know, we'll see how we go, but next year we're going to have much firmer timeline on that, so we're going to be drumming up the interest.
Awesome. So the Sandpit project as a whole had its desired effect in that you've now got support to push this through to the rest of the government. I mean, that's huge.
Absolutely.
Congratulations, guys. Well done.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, and unless there's any last minute hands go up, no. Thank you, Jayden, Ngaire, not just for the presentation this evening, but for all of that work. And as much information as you can provide to the Rules as Code Guild and this little community of interest that is growing all the time, the better, so that we can spread the news far and wide beyond the shores of Australia to the rest of the world. So, you know, it's a great example of what can happen. For everybody watching this on YouTube after this evening, you can go to racguild.org to find that information that Jayden and Ngaire can provide. That will be on the website, as will be the directions and the invitations to the next event, which, as I said at the beginning, is going to be in February. So for now, thank you very much. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, whatever works for you. Have a great holiday, and we look forward to seeing you in February. Thank you for coming.